I've had all these people say, like, can I do what you're doing? And the answer could be yes, but it's also still most likely no. It's really hard to get multiple winners year after year after year. It's a lot of work for not a whole lot of reward. Indie devs are going to see a lot of pain over the next couple of years. Sales are way down, and the algorithm is fickle.
What would you recommend to people who want to get into game development?
Dude, this is like the hardest question, and this is like really the meat of this episode, really.
Hello and welcome back to another podcast episode of a series that I'm calling How This Indie Dev... In my previous episode, we had a talk with Toby from Square Glade Games about how he crushed his Kickstarter campaign. And today I have the illustrious guest Eli Brewer from TreeFall Studios, and we're going to be talking about how this indie dev... We'll get there. And we're going to be talking about how this indie dev sold over $200,000 on consoles. So, welcome to the podcast, Eli.
Yo, dude, what's up? What's up? I'm so glad to be here. I'm here with my favorite game developer, Thomas Stewart. And thanks for having me on, man. My name's Eli Brewer, and I make video games.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've been having a lot of chats offline for a while now, and it's been really fun to learn about your methodology for approaching game development. And I thought it'd be super fun to have you on the podcast. And the way that I kind of wanted to structure this conversation is taking things through kind of your history as a game developer. Start with like the past and how you got into game development, how things have progressed over the years, and then talk about the present and how things are working right now and what you've learned. And then kind of look forward ahead to the future as well, and kind of speculate on what the game industry in general is going to look like, and then your studio specifically, kind of what kind of stuff you're working on. So if that sounds good to you, we can just jump right into it.
Sounds good. That sounds great. The future is looking a little bleak, man. So I'm excited. I'm excited to talk. I'm excited to talk about that. But yeah, so my name's Eli Brewer. I run an indie game studio called TreeFall Studios. I've been making games professionally, or as you would say, commercially. I don't know if I would call it professional. It's professional now, but when I started, it was a little rough around the edges. I've been releasing commercial games for 10 years. I started on the Wii U in 2014. And I released a game called The Letter, which was like a big viral hit in the negative sense. Like everyone ripped it to shreds and was talking about how it was the worst game of 2014 and stuff like that. Because back then, little small games didn't really make it on the consoles. It was kind of, unheard of, and only a couple of indies would squeak through the cracks, and they would be like, big high quality titles. And I basically released a student project type of game on the Wii U, and it just went viral. I got a huge fan base from it though. Like it was I call it a cult classic now. A lot of people actually played it for what it was and did enjoy it. So that's how I got my start and had a little bit of like virality behind it. And basically from there on, I just took constructive criticism and kept making games and trying to make games better and better, because my skill level was like so bad then. I mean, it's not really great now. I would consider myself like, high average at the best. It's not like I'm a super talented artist or anything like that. I do have a lot of great ideas and a lot of vision, but I can't always make everything come alive myself. So I've been learning, growing my game development skills for the last 10 years. I release games on the Nintendo Wii U, and then I release games on PlayStation first, I think, and then I moved to Steam, and my core base is on PlayStation. I've also released on PlayStation 5, not just PlayStation 4, and the Xbox One, Xbox Series X, and the Atari VCS, which is like a niche console, in case any of you guys haven't heard of it. It's pretty cool. We can talk about that some a little bit down the road. And yeah, so I've released a ton of games over the last 10 years, basically, and just continued to listen to fans, try to get better, and try to bring my ideas to life, and that's what I've been doing.
Nice. That's awesome. So it's September 2024 right now, and right. You said you started 10 years ago?
Yeah, so I think The Letter came out, I think it was July 10th in 2014.
Okay.
So that's when I consider it my official start. Although I did have some projects in 2013. We were kind of starting early. I had a successfully funded Kickstarter campaign in like 2013, but it was like for $850. It wasn't like we were like a breakout hit. It's like, me and my friend from my game design school. We were just doing like this small project, and we, got like 50 backers or something like that, around $5 a pledge or something, $10. And then we were going to release it on PC. I don't consider that a commercial release. I actually released the game. It's called Night Detective. It's available on PlayStation now. I remastered it years later, but it released. We couldn't get on Steam back in the day because that was when it was Steam Greenlight, and we just didn't have the following, and no one really wanted to play the game on Steam. So we released it on a platform called De Jura, I think is what it's called. They don't even exist anymore. It was kind of like a Steam like knockoff. It was almost like an itch.io type thing, and but for paid games only. Mostly there wasn't like a bunch of free projects, and they kind of went under, and then they turned into like one of those mobile sites where you just play a bunch of games like in the browser, and then I don't even think it exists anymore. So I say my official start is in 2014. Yeah.
So that's super interesting. So it was like a ways before I started looking into game development. And so can you kind of give an overview of like what was the landscape like? Like you said, Steam was not as approachable as it was now. You had to get it was like a curated greenlight system for indies. What was going on with like the different console platforms, and like how is it different from what we see today for game developers?
Dude, it was insanely different. I feel bad, like if you're like new to game development now, you're just trying to get into it now. It's like, one, your outlook is bleak because there's some issues with the economy and sales figures aren't what they used to be, but also it's much better now than it used to be. It used to be like so much harder, and people were so much more vicious online in terms of like your games and stuff. So it's like, honestly, if I had to choose between the two, it's like I would choose now to get started than choosing back then. Because I went to college in 2012. I was at community college, and I was going to transfer to a 4-year university. I decided to take a single game design class, and after that I was like, oh, I'm sold. They had like a 2-year program for game design at my community college, so I was like, oh, this is so much fun. And that's when I started to do the indie thing. 2012, 2013 to 2014 is when I was doing the letter stuff. And what we tried to do was, back then it was PS3 and Xbox 360, the PS4 and all that stuff hadn't come out. PS4 came out in 2013, and I don't think they had availability for like indies to sign up and stuff at that point. And you had the Wii U, and that's how I got onto it. So I was looking around. I was like, okay, we want to make games. We want to try to release games. We want to make money. And you basically only had Steam. And what you had to do was, Greenlight was like the predecessor to Wishlist. Basically, you basically had to put your game on this marketplace and get enough wishlist, or they wouldn't let you release. And that number was like 20,000. You basically had to have like 20 to 30,000, or Steam wouldn't even look at it, and then they wouldn't bother with setting up your release. So we just had games on there where we just threw out projects, and then people would go on there and just leave comments. It was basically like setting up a Facebook page or a Steam page for your game, and people would be like, this sucks. I'm not going to use the vile language that they did, but I'll say they said, this sucks, you guys should I'm actually not even going to repeat some of the stuff we saw back then. It was it was vicious. Like, so there's a much more accepting crowd of like understanding, like, oh, this is a small indie game. I'm not need to compare this to AAA. Some guy made this heartfelt project in his spare bedroom, and there's some fun to be had, and there's fans of indie games now. Back then, everyone was like really kind of stuck up. I mean, people still are, but everyone's like expected indie games to be AAA, and going through Greenlight was like a bloodbath. That's why they got rid of it. So basically, we couldn't do that. But we got
I have a question
funded.
Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, so you said you took a game design class and you started getting into game development, and then you tried to figure out how to like monetize it. And I think that's super interesting because we're like about the same age, and 10 years ago, I didn't think that I would be able to make and sell my own video games at all. And it wasn't until much later when I saw other people online doing it that I was like, oh, people actually make their own video games and then sell them, and like that's their career. So how did you come to that conclusion? Because there couldn't have been very many people that were doing that at that time. right?
Nah, it was just like that's back when like it was like the Super Meat Boy thing.
Yeah.
It's like the indie game movie or whatever. I think we
Yeah.
had to watch. I think we were supposed to watch that for game design school or something. And I'm like, I don't even remember watching it. I don't think that I've seen that. It's all controversial now. It's got the Fez guy or whatever. A
Yeah.
lot of people dislike that guy, but they were all. It was like him and the Meat Boy guys and the guy who made Braid. All those dudes. I'm pretty sure like those were like the only indie games at that point, because that was like those games came out like 2000 and what was that 2008 or something.
Yeah.
And this is like 4 years after that, so it's like this stuff was picking up steam, but it wasn't like a broken open market. And honestly, dude, I didn't even know any of those games existed. I didn't have an Xbox 360. And those were all like marketplace games, because like Xbox was like the pioneer of like indie games, really, that you could self-publish. Like you couldn't do that. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, I don't think you could do that on PS3, and you couldn't do that on Wii at the time during those years. And Nintendo was like basically trying to allow that like 360 marketplace to happen when they released the Wii U. They opened the floodgates, and they got a lot of flack for it. So then they pulled back with who could be a publisher on the Switch, but they don't have any content control, so lots of trash gets through on the Switch. But so I don't know. I didn't really know about those games that much. They mentioned them at game design school, and I kind of was just like, I don't know. I just thought like, oh, the indie thing exists, and I just want to be like Nintendo. I just want to release video games, and I only played Nintendo games basically at the time. I grew up playing PlayStation games on PlayStation 1 and 2. But then around the GameCube years, I became like a hardcore Nintendo fan and played GameCube and Wii mainly. And then I was like, oh, I just want to release a game on Nintendo. That was like my dream. So like right when I was in college, I was looking around and was like, okay, checking out the other people in my class and stuff like that. And no one really had any indie ambitions. I was kind of like trying to pick people out to join me, be like, come join my team, let's do a team, let's have fun, let's make a game together, because everyone kind of wanted to work in AAA, and I kind of looked at the AAA games at the time and kind of looked at what everyone was making in class and what I was being, not that I was so much better than them, I was making like really ugly looking prototypes and stuff. I was thinking like, dude, how are we supposed to get jobs in AAA if this is your skill? And my friend who actually started TreeFall Studios with me, he dropped out. The guy who worked on Night Detective with me, he actually dropped out of our game design school and just got a job at Affinity Ward, and he went straight to AAA. And I kind of looked at that and was like, college doesn't matter, skills matter. And I was like, you have to have what it takes to work in AAA. You have it or you don't. And I was thinking like, at the time I was kind of thinking, I kind of don't. I don't know. Like at this point, like maybe eventually I could, but like right now I just don't really know enough. And the stuff I was learning in class was like very, very minimal. Like to get my games to come out, like I had to self-teach myself, like on top of like the baseline I learned from school. It wasn't like a whole lot, it was just like a very minimal baseline basically. So I kind of wanted to go, okay, well, I want to do this. I don't see myself working AAA. I also didn't want to move. That was a huge point of contention. And basically all the stuff was like all across the country. I'm on the East Coast. I'm in North Carolina. I could go work for like Epic Games, make Fortnite or whatever. But I didn't really want to do that either. Maybe one day in the future I'll do that. Who knows? So I didn't want to move. So I was like, okay, it kind of funneled me into the indie lane. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, there wasn't really many other options. I was like, if I want to do this, because I already, at the time of college, I was already learning like how time consuming it was. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to sit here and just do this on the side. I got, so many other things, responsibilities, I'll never come out with a game unless I'm doing it full time. And I had all these dreams in my head of games that I would like to make. And I was like, well, you're not gonna be able to do this at a company. I want to make my own company. That's basically where it all came from. Instead of like, I didn't see someone and like follow their example and go, oh, they did it, so I can do it. I just started blindly throwing stuff like darts at the board in the dark and learning that I was hitting the wall a bunch.
Yeah, totally.
until I finally figured out what stuck. You know what I mean?
Yep. That's awesome. So I applaud you because that's super hard to do. And I feel like, for me, I didn't even think that game development was a viable career path, even in AAA industry initially, because I thought that there weren't going to be enough jobs and I wouldn't have the skills to be able to get a job in the game industry and all that stuff. But I want to, what I'm really interested to hear about from you also is, like the first, do you remember like the first dollar that you made making games? And like can you take me through the process of when you realized, oh, I think I could make a full-time living doing this?
Oh yeah, for sure.
And was that the same moment, or was there a big gap between like first dollar and like, oh, could be sustainable?
No, it was the very first moment. But for me, I would think that I have a, maybe somewhat of a relatable up and down for people who are like trying it now, because like I went full-time, quit, went full-time again, kind of quit, went full-time again. So I've had like a roller coaster. If you would look back, if you pull up my YouTube channel, the videos go back 10 years, and I basically just have for years just released just devlogs. It wasn't until like the last couple of years that I started doing like, game dev tips videos and stuff. But it would be like you could look at the devlogs and then see like a bunch, and then like see it stop, and then like see like, some like only one this year. And it's like you can kind of go back and follow all those trends and be like, oh, I wasn't really working then, or I was working really hard, this year and stuff. So to go back to the Wii U thing, I was working, this was 2012 to like 2014 or something like that. I was working at a bowling alley. That was my part-time job while I was in college, so I was going to college during the day. I was working the bowling lanes at night, bro. It was a lot of fun, but I had like the dirty jobs. I was cleaning out the trash and doing all that kind of stuff,
cleaning out the gutters, literally.
Yeah, I would go down there, they'd get their balls stuck, and I would crawl down the lane or whatever, go get it. Yeah. They would have the league dudes would have a bad night. They'd be like, you got to clean this spot right here, boy. It's the floor is too dirty. That's why I'm bowling bad. And I'd be like down there on the floor cleaning the floor, stuff like that. So I was making like back then. Well, I don't know what the minimum wage is now for my state. I want to say it's still the same thing, $7.50. So I was making $7.50 an hour, and I was only working nights, so I wasn't making that much money, per month or whatever. And I was working on the games. So I was doing college, and then I was working nights, and then I was basically working like late nights and stuff, on the game. So it's like I was almost doing like 3 type of jobs. And that's kind of why that's like how I came up. It's like looking back at it, it's like I didn't even know that was going to be my MO eventually, like to make the small games. But like then I was like, well, I got to make a small game because I don't know how to make a big game. And then it's like, even then I didn't have time, to make like a giant game. So I was like, oh, let's just try a prototype and like see if it sticks. And, I logged in the day that I sold that game. I had no idea. Like I literally thought like, oh, maybe 10 people will buy this game, and it costs $2 and I'll make like $20 today. And I didn't know anything. Like I wasn't checking the internet. I wasn't like, I don't even know if I sent out press codes, dude. Like I don't think I was like, I didn't know anyone in the press. Like I don't think I was like waiting for reviews or anything like that. I just like, it was a silent launch. I just published the game on the Wii U, and then someone picked it up, and people were like roasting it and all that kind of stuff. And the first day that I checked the sales, it was more than like 2 or 3 months of like my bowling alley income in like a single day. And back then I was like, like I just said, I was checking out the trash and scrubbing the floors and vacuuming this mega bowling lane thing every single night. And I was like, well, I like making video games. I thought to myself like, oh, I should just keep doing what I'm doing, keep making money from the job, and then like keep working on the video games. But I did the dumb thing, and I was like, I quit.
Nice.
I was like, I'm gonna do the video game thing. And then after that, it kind of rode up and down like the Wii U years. after that, I did better for a couple of years because then I released Maze, and it was a lot better than the letter was. And I released the original Perplexing Orb on Wii U. When we talk about my games and stuff, I'll talk about those, more. So like those, for a couple of years they did good, but then the Wii U kind of died like really fast, and then they were like preparing for the Switch. So then like it kind of died fast, and then I went from community college to I transferred and did I went to 2 years of game school and then did 4 years of business school right after it. So like when I went back to business school, I was like working part-time, and then there was like a year where I basically stopped. I have all my games written down in a row, and it's like the year that Pitterpot came out, I wasn't really working. Like it came out, and then like I made like a little money on PlayStation. That's like my least performing game on PlayStation, and that was my first one on there. And then it wasn't until like 2019 is when like it started to kick up for me again. So if I'm looking at it, like 2016, like I started going to like full-time university. So like 16, 17, 18 to half of 19, like I wasn't really doing the game thing. And I look back at it now, now that it's more successful for me, and, the YouTube channel is growing, and, we're me and you both are on the kind of like on a growth track at the moment. I look back and I'm like, if I would have just gone hard, like back then when less people weren't doing it, and instead of like, spending, I guess more social life in college and doing all this kind of stuff, I'm like, geez, I could have been, sometimes I think I could have already been at a higher peak or whatever. Sure. But basically, I don't really regret it. I've released a ton of awesome games over the years. It's been a whole lot of fun. So I kind of stopped, and then I wanted to do it again. And then I spent like a year, like right after the business school, doing the game thing. And then I was like, it's too hard. Then I went back and did a full-time like accounting job for like a year or so. And then I quit that again, like right before COVID in like 2019. And then from then on, I've basically been full-time. That's when the PlayStation stuff really started rising up for me. 2020, 2021, 22, all that stuff. I was releasing a bunch of games. The games were really selling, that kind of thing. So I don't even remember what the original question was. I went off on a
that's super interesting.
Tangent for you.
Yeah, I mean, you have a lot of history because you started like 10 years ago, right? And you've released like what, close to 20 games now, and on consoles you've sold over $200,000 in revenue. Like that's pretty crazy. Yep.
So I try to just to put this out there for the audience, like I try not to break any kind of NDAs. So like they're very specific about how much money. You're not supposed to say figures or whatever. Yeah. So I just give like it's above this, I just throw that number out there because, that shows like a little bit of validity to like, when I'm talking, like, it's over six figures, over that. And that's just for like, that's basically, over that for just PlayStation and, and Wii U. And like, we also have Steam sales, Xbox now. I'm not even counting Xbox into those calculations just because it just started this year. We released our first Xbox game this year. Tilting Tiles came out on Xbox, and then also that doesn't include thanks, man. And that doesn't include the Atari VCS stuff, or I've got a Patreon page as well. And like I said, I had a couple of small time Kickstarters, about $1,000 or so, like back in the day. So that's kind of like my income breakdown. But I don't remember. I don't remember where I was going with that.
No, that's awesome. So you're doing. You have a diverse stream of income, but you've had a really good amount of success in the past. Wrapping up before we transition into more of the present, I'm interested to hear, you kind of touched on how, you wish you could have gone like really hard at like a key turning point in like maybe 2019, but I'm interested, is that like your biggest regret, or what would your biggest regret be from in the past, and also, what do you think your biggest achievement is over the past decade of making games?
Oh, bro, that's a hard one. So biggest regret, it's kind of hard. I would say it's like my biggest career regret for if like I'm gonna, like at this point I'm in the mindset of like, a lot of businesses are going to go under over the next year for studios, indie studios, AAA studios. And it's in my mindset that I'm like, I'm going to continue to try to get this to succeed and fight through this kind of rough time. And then on the other side of it, when things turn around, I'm hoping to blow the studio up, hire some new people, that kind of thing. So if we're looking at a TreeFall Studios regret, if I'm looking at, I got my list here, probably that 2016 to 2019 era, back when YouTube was a lot smaller. That's back when all the game dev YouTubers were way smaller. If I would have started these games that I was making in 2021 and stuff back then, like it could be a whole lot bigger at this point. But I guess it's not really a regret because like I didn't have the full skills. Like I would have gotten them quicker if I would have worked harder. But like at the same time, I went to college. I met my wife. We got married. We went on all sorts of trips, dating and stuff like that. And it's like, I can't give. It's like I would never give that stuff up. I would never give that time away. So it's like, what's more important, work or relationships? The answer is always relationships. So, but work is important because you need money.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so it's like, that'd be probably my biggest, probably like not going full time the whole time. But at the same time, it's like I didn't, for a couple of those years, like that, when we throw out those figures of like, oh, it's over 200,000. Well, you got to realize that a lot of that's concentrated like just recently, because like some of those years that I'm mentioning, 16, 17, 18, all that stuff, those are like low like 4-figure years, like just a few $1,000s. I wasn't really doing anything. I wasn't releasing games. I was like on dead platforms, all that kind of stuff. So when you really look at it, it's like I've only really been working full time the last like 2 years or something, three years really. But yeah, so I guess that's probably my biggest regret. If I could have changed something, like just have more of me never sleeping, working all the time. But I don't know how I could have done it any different. I guess my biggest accomplishment, if we're talking about in terms of like just the the TreeFall stuff, I don't know, probably like the self-publishing thing is like an accomplishment in itself. Like I like figured out how to make games on Wii U, like basically by myself. Like I had to ask a bunch of devs like in the forums like questions, but I'm like I had to parse through all the documents and figure it out. And then like going from that, like that was like crazy back in the day how you used to have to do that. I can't talk about like the Unity specifics because like Nintendo's got ninjas everywhere, they'll come get you, so it was a lot harder than PlayStation, I'll just say that.
And you were saying back in the day, like on some platforms, they didn't even have like sales data that you could access on the internet. They had to like mail you a physical piece of paper so that you could see how much game sales you had.
We were talking about that a little bit before the show, and like because I don't actually know how much money. I guess I could go through like my accountant and like look at my tax returns or whatever and add it all up through all the years. But like I don't have like I'm keeping records now like on spreadsheets and stuff to kind of like look and see like what the games are making and stuff now. But like when the 2015 to like 2018 years on the Wii U and stuff, like whenever I got to like releasing games in Europe, I released a couple games in Europe. Like I think starting in 2017, I like ported the Gem Collector over there, and it was maybe the Letter. I don't know what it was. I think it was the Gem Collector and Annihilation. Those were the two games I put in Europe on Wii U, because it was much more difficult at the time. They had a whole completely different entity, a different website, a different process. It was completely different. It wasn't the streamlined dev site that they have now, and they would just mail me a report. It would come from like Germany, and it would be like, have euros on it and a bunch of stuff and be like, this is what you made, and this is, I couldn't even understand the cuts, like what was my cut. It was like in euros. The money would just show up in the account, so like I have no idea how much I made from that. That's not even in so like the European stuff's not even in that calculations either, so I don't know how much it is. It's just it's right. Something.
I agree though. I think that porting to consoles, especially in the past, is a huge accomplishment because it's not an easy thing to do, especially for an individual.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so like I guess like the self-publishing, running the business is like I would say like the overall biggest accomplishment, and then my favorite, like my biggest accomplishment so far in terms of games is like either Tilting Tiles or Maze Pedestal of Trials to me. Probably Tilting Tiles because if you would see like the code base for it, it's like the game looks so simple, but it's like unbelievably complex because like there's so many towers and there's so many like places that the character can move, and like what do you do when the character is in this situation? Are you allowed to double jump? Are you allowed to diagonal jump? Are you allowed to shrink? Are you allowed to hit a lever? Can you tilt? Can you move to this one? Can you move to this one? Can you move up, down, left, right, below? Are you on a teleport, a moving platform, a whirlwind, all sorts of things? It's like, for me, it's because I'm not a programmer and I'm like all self-taught, I kind of clean that up over the years, and it's like I just look at it, I'm like, dang, dude. I'm like, I can't even believe it exists. I look at it, I'm like, how did I even come up with this, to make the game? And then like, let alone like, because at this point, like the code is basically written. I only write code to it when I'm making a new one, making a new ability or whatever. And like I can spend my whole time on like doing the level design, which is my favorite part of game design, building the puzzles and stuff.
Yeah, and 100%. I've followed you and some other developers for a while, and it's interesting to where like people have their sweet spots, and like I think of like I feel like I come from a programming background, so I feel like programming is my sweet spot. I look at somebody else, and somebody else is really good at like design and deep like mechanics for a game, and then like when I think about you, I always think about level design, because you are really good at like thinking about things in like a physical space and like making interesting levels, and you always have like so anyway, I would love for you to pick up Pitter Pod again, because I feel like a 3D platformer would be like a really cool place for you to demonstrate that stuff.
I was gonna say like it kind of feels like my chains haven't come off yet. Like that, like, I'm like, not to toot my own horn, but I'm like, I could blow your mind with some of the levels that I want to build, but like, I just don't have the capabilities to like actually implement them because like of the programming or because of the art. It's like, I would say like at this point, I'm like somewhere in the average like of self-taught programmers. Like I know more than a base level, but I'm not like high level. Like so much more than me. You could program circles around me. Like it's amazing the stuff that you could code so quickly. And then like my art is like, I say it's trash, but like it's gotten a lot better. Like just being able to like do a little bit of better color design, and like that's why some of my puzzle games are more simple. Like Tilting Tiles is simple because I can just get something clean looking, or like mix textures together and like do like unique effects and stuff like that, to where just clean and nice. But like high quality art is not, it's something I'm working on. I feel like I'm getting better, but like if I could get to those two things, then I feel like I could just go off the chain with my level design. Yeah, that's my favorite part, So
yeah, definitely.
That's
and
like
I feel
why
like
I make games.
Yeah, same. I feel like that's what really led me or attracted me to the indie route, is that you get to wear so many different hats and learn so many different disciplines. Like at my previous job that I was at, I really liked it. I was working on a game studio on a really cool game, but I was just a programmer, and I wanted to learn how to do all of the other stuff, design and art and all of it. All the business stuff. And so I feel like that leads us to a really good transition of, so you kicked up this game studio, and you've been releasing games across different platforms, making some money, and you got better at all of the hard technical skills for releasing games. And so that brings us to the present. So where are you at now? How have you changed as a developer, and how has the landscape in general changed too?
So there's a lot I can go on to that. I'm going to try to think through it all at the same time. So, as far as changing as a developer, it's like, dude, if you would boot up the like Wii U games I released, like if you had a Wii U and like the shop is closed down now, and you looked at some of that stuff, it's like, holy moly, how did this guy ever go full time? Like it's almost like cringeworthy I'm proud of them, but like it's almost cringeworthy at the same time, where it's like, bro, this looks really bad. It's like, how did I release this? But it's like the best, at the time that I thought it was really good, So I feel like where I am at now is like refinement, like learning, getting. I feel like I polish up a little bit better, like the UI and thinking about game feel and the player experience a little bit better now than I used to. I used to be like, okay, these levels are really cool. I'm excited about these maze levels, but like, the Wii U version was like, half the graphics were ugly and the UI is like really bad, and it didn't run that super good. And it's like now it's like just polishing up a lot of different areas to like try to make the games better. I've remastered, quote unquote, a lot of my old games from Wii U on PlayStation, and they're much better than they used to be. But like I would say like my newer games now are like higher quality than the remasters that I did were, so I feel like I'm in an improvement stage. That's where I'm at. I'm releasing. I used to say I would try to get like 2 games a year, so I've got everything written down. Like I've released 7. I released 7 games on Wii U, 17 games on PlayStation. I think I've got 8 games on Switch and 1. No, it's not Switch. Steam. Like I don't know. I was looking at the Nintendo thing. 8 games on Steam, 7 games on Atari VCS. I think it's 6 or 7, and then 1 on the Xbox. But so that sounds like a ton. But in terms of actual individual unique IP, that's like 19 games. And that's over the course of 10 years. So that's basically releasing 2 games every year on average. So you're looking at like 6 months dev cycles, basically. So that's where I was, and where I'm at now is kind of like, I used to try to shoot for that, and that's like what my overall average is, but now I'm shooting between like 2 and 4 for the year. And like you can look, like I have data and charts, and this is going into like the game industry now. Games sell less now than they used to, and I don't know if I think that's a number of factors, really. I don't know if it's like people, because one, you could say people have less money to spend on games. The economy's tight, inflation is high, all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, you can also point to, well, more money is being spent on games every year, and like this year more money has been spent on games than last year. But if you really look at the breakdown of where that money is going, it's all microtransactions, and it's like Fortnite and Call of Duty and Apex Legends. It's all the exact same games, and like they're just getting a bigger piece of the pie because prices are just going up. And I feel like people are just playing the same games over and over and over. And I think that like individuals who are selling games are seeing less sales than they used to see, even though the overall game industry is quote unquote growing. And that's why you got all these people trying to make live service games and cash in and make their own cash cows, and doing flops like Sony's Concord and stuff like that, because people just want that addiction cycle. To me, I'm like, they're almost like an addiction cycle. It's like they're just getting you to spend money on games over and over, the same on games and stuff. So I wouldn't say that like game sales are growing per se for people. And if you look at like my data, like it peaked, like my most successful year ever, and the reason why I'm still like doing full time now is 2021. And that year I only released, I think, I did 3 games. So I did 3 games that year, and that was my highest income year of all time. That was the year I released Tilting Tiles, Maze Pedestal Trials, and the Gem Collector Wii U port onto PlayStation. And then 2022 was a little bit lower, but still like ballpark about the same thing. So it was like I wasn't really seeing the trend yet. So it's kind of like it was going down a little bit, but I was like, oh, it's still doing good. But if you look at my 2022, I released 4 games, plus I published a game for my friend that year. So it's like I technically released 5 games and still made less than 2021. And that's how, like, if you really start to look at these game launches, like I'm tracking now launch to launch, like each launch is getting smaller. Even if I'm gaining followers, even if the games are better, like, tons of things are better about the games now than they used to be, but they used to make more money. And so another big thing about it is I think visibility is like murdering indie devs, and like for people who are quitting their job and like trying to break into the market, visibility is something that like a lot of people don't understand. Recently I was on the Thomas Brush podcast, and I was mentioning, you've seen, we both follow a lot of big developers like him and Jonas Tyroller and the Chooch Charles guy and all these guys who are super successful YouTubers and stuff like that. So people like look at their games and look at their channel and think like, oh, there's plenty of, they're getting tons of views and stuff like that. But I feel like the social media algorithms have changed, and the storefront algorithms have changed and made it highly difficult if you're small and you're starting now, versus like if you already had an audience. Like if you already have an audience, like you'll be able to continue to maintain your algorithm if you're uploading in your consistent schedule and you're making the content that those people want to watch still. But like if you're starting from scratch, like, for instance, you've had a pretty good growth run. I would say like your YouTube channel has had one of the best growth runs that I've seen of all the other people who were starting out recently. But even like, like let's say back in the day, like what if you would have done this like 10 years ago? You could have already, you've already seen like how much work it takes to go just like a little bit. And there's like a lot of people who are watching you and going, I want to do what you're doing. Like I can't imagine hitting 10,000 subs or doing any of this stuff, because like I've talked to indie developers like all day. I know tons of devs with like 500 subscribers, 200 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. I only just recently broke 2,000 subscribers. Like it's really hard. People say just make a great game.
Yep.
But like if I make a tweet now, like I used to put stuff on Twitter back in the Wii U days, and like if you looked at the analytics, it's like the impressions would be huge, and like now I can make a tweet and it might only have 12 impressions, and I'm like, at this point, and I've got 2,000 followers or whatever, and they just don't see it. At this point, the algorithm has changed. Like you have to like do like rage bait content or, platitudinal content, or you just like spitting out platitudes all day of like, this is like feely good stuff. You just tweet nonsense in order to create engagement. It's like you can't just share like your screenshot Saturday picture anymore and go, here's this cool game I'm working on. I'm authentic. Like I want your feedback. And that barely breaks through for people. Only some games do. It's much harder.
So I want to. Have you seen Jonas Tyroller's most recent video?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to get get your 2 cents on it, because he postulates this idea that indie devs don't need to worry about marketing. They just need to make good games or make great games. I think that was his big title of the video, is like, if you just concentrate on making a good quality game, then you don't have to worry about, you have to do some minimal marketing stuff like set up a store page and all of this stuff, but he's saying you don't need to actually work that hard at marketing, because if you have a good game, it'll market itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I got a lot of thoughts on that actually, and I agree with him to an extent in the video. Like, he talks about how the algorithm basically is the new marketing, and you don't need to do the old marketing. And that's true. That's 100% true. Like he's 100% correct. He's right. And the reason he's so successful is because he knows the algorithm and he can play to its strengths. But there's a whole host of reasons why I kind of disagree, with some of those things. On his points of like, oh, this is the better way. I actually think it's worse for developers, because like we were just talking about, if you're small, it's going to be impossible to hit those algorithm markers basically, because you need a certain amount of wish lists, and you can make the greatest game in the world. And if you just post it on Twitter and you have 0 followers, no one is going to see it. And even if it is really, really awesome, like it is going to take time. And like it's going to take a lot of time to build up those followers, to build up those wish lists. And you might not have that time, and you might just not hit the algorithm. You might not get to what you need because you were just too small. And another thing is the algorithm is kind of, this is the last thing I'll say on it. I got more thoughts on this, but I'm going to keep it kind of short. and you can be overshadowed by the algorithm, and then if you don't hit the algorithm at the right time, you're done. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, Command and Conquer, which is now published by EA. It's, old school games, major games. There was a big stink because all these indie games were on the new and trending page, and then EA decided to shadow drop those games out of the blue.
Yep.
And they just took over the entire new and trending page. Mm-hmm. So if you have been building up your wish list, you've been doing all this stuff for years, you're on the front page, but then someone comes and overshadows you, because there will always be a bigger fish. There's always a bigger fish. Someone is better than you. Some company is better than you. Some bigger game is going to come out right around the corner, and then you're no longer to be talked about. And it's not just about wish lists. To stay in the Valve algorithm to where they promote your game and you can make as much money as he can in his games, they continue promoting Thronefall, is you have to hit internal metrics of that you've sold this much, your return rate is this low, people are playing your game for this many hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They look at all those stats, and you only have a short time to prove that your game can do those metrics. And if you get bumped off the first page for whatever reason, well, sorry, bro. I mean, you might have worked really hard to try to get the algorithm to like you, but the algorithm has favored someone else. And that doesn't mean that you didn't have a great game. Because the whole point is that if you make a great game, you're going to win. That's not true. There's plenty of great games that got bumped off that page. Or you can even look at Square Enix, for example, or some of these other bigger games. Like, they're quote unquote releasing great games to people, but they've been releasing them recently around other high profile games or on platforms with limited audience of their fans. Everyone wants their games on Switch. It might only be on PlayStation or whatever. Doesn't mean they didn't make a great game. The algorithm did take them to victory.
And I think about like the story of Vampire Survivors, because that game is like, people agree that it's a fun game and it's a really good game, but it went under the radar for a long time, and it was almost just by pure luck that it got discovered. Like, I don't remember the exact story, but I think some streamer influencer like played it, and then like people started noticing it because they were just looking in the catacombs of the Steam store, And so I feel like, how many more games are there that are out there that just haven't had that opportunity to get that spark of publicity that could really set it off, But I understand the sentiment for you can't polish a turd, right? Like, if you have like a bad game and you try and market the heck out of it, and then you blame the marketing, I think it is both, for sure.
No, yeah, for sure. So
okay, I want to ask you. So people who want to get into game development, people who are trying to learn the best way to make it a viable career path for them. And they're looking around, they're like, oh, this person signed with a publisher, and maybe I want to put together a demo and sign a publisher, and then I would get funding, and then I could do it full time. Or people look at what you're doing, they're like, oh, maybe I should make a lot of games and port them to consoles, and or maybe I should concentrate on like doing YouTube first, and then like making game development content around YouTube. All of this stuff. There's a lot of different things that people are doing. What would you recommend to people who want to get into game development?
Dude, this is like the hardest question, and this is like really the meat of this episode, really, because I'm sure people are watching this, trying to figure out, how do I get, into game development, that kind of thing, following this story. I received a lot of new subscribers, new followers, after I did the Thomas Brush podcast, and basically I've been getting a ton of emails, a ton of Discord questions over and over and over of like people like trying to figure out how to do the small game thing, telling me that they thought it was interesting and they're wanting to learn how to do it. So like, in my opinion, when I look around, you lay out all these options. You got options. You can work like 10 years and release in part-time and release a giant game like Stardew Valley. Or you can do like what I'm doing and release small games every 3 to 6 months. Or you can go polish up a demo and try to pitch it to a publisher and try to get funding. And then if you go that route, you're basically going to end up having to do the same thing over and over and over, polish up another demo once the game's done, pitch it for more funding. You could do the Kickstarter route, like your friends you just talked to in the last episode. You can bring it to the public and say, can you guys fund this game, so we can build the game. You can even try doing the YouTube game dev thing. I think that's the least viable path now, actually, just because, like, we were talking about algorithms with his video. We talk about algorithms determine whether your game is successful. But now algorithms determine, like, if your YouTube channel is going to be successful, and it's very rare that you're going to have devlogs blow up or you're going to have your game blow up. Basically, your YouTube content has to be game development tutorials, game development how-tos, how much money I made, how to get started in business, how to run a studio, how to port to consoles, how to port to Steam, over and over and over. And if you spend all your time I've been working on a video. I have like a script for this. I've been working on a video for this for like 6 months, and I just haven't done it because I don't have the time, because I'm working on games, not YouTube, as my full-time, gig. But basically, like, if you focus on YouTube, like, I have all these stats where I'm like, I was just reading you the years of my games coming out and which ones were better and which ones were worse. Well, the years where I put out more videos and less games, I made less money. The years I put out more games and got less views, I made more money, because people are seeing those games on consoles. They're seeing them from the press, YouTubers, streamers, whoever is playing the game. People see it that way. They don't have to see it from my YouTube channel. You can go the route where you make a YouTube channel and try to, get your audience to play the games, but they're really not going to follow you. Like, in most cases, it's like we're seeing with, we've talked about this a bunch personally off air, that the videos that blow up are game development related videos, and those types of audience subscribers, that's great. I mean, like, they want to hang out with you. You want to get advice from Thomas. He's a great person to get advice from. You want to get advice from me. I could do what I can. But usually those people aren't like looking to buy video games. They're not customers to buy video games. So if you're watching this and thinking, oh, how am I going to get started in video game development? Well, running a YouTube channel that tells you how to get into game development and do tutorials isn't really going to help you sell any games unless your game is like super good,
Yeah, that's what I found to be true as well. Yeah, like,
that's my least viable path. Don't do that.
I found that when I have a successful video on YouTube, I will look at my game sales, and there's like almost no influence on if I get a bunch of views. People aren't wanting to buy my games because they watch my videos, so that I see them as like two distinct things, and I like doing them both. But I definitely, originally I thought YouTube might be like a good marketing strategy for the games that I'm developing and make devlogs for that and stuff and get people interested. That really hasn't shown to be the case so far.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. So, like, for me, I just like make devlogs for my core fans and stuff, and we just hang out. I mean, I love interacting with the community, chatting, taking feedback. If someone says, "Oh, this is cool," or "Oh, you should change this," I'll take it into consideration, that kind of thing. So, like, I wouldn't say that that's the best path. Like, I still hold that, like, marketing on your own is viable. Like, you need to have a Twitter, you need to have a YouTube. I also have a Facebook, but I don't really use it. I post on Reddit every time that my games come out, but that's the only time I ever get on there, so I don't really use it. Mm-hmm. You try social media, you do these things, but I guess my bigger, marketing strategy now is Discord. Like, I'm growing the Discord community. Those are people that want to hang out, want to get advice from me, want to play my games, that kind of thing. So, I post when the new game comes out or when the new video comes out, and they see it that way a lot easier. But as for me, I've had all these people say, like, can I do what you're doing? And the answer could be yes, but it's also still most likely no, because it's like, you're basically on a similar trajectory, and you're realizing, you're trying to do the small games just like I'm doing. You're releasing multiple games, and we talk off air. I'm not gonna say anything personal off this, but I'm like, you're starting to make money now, but you just posted a video that you said, I'm not making enough, right? And then we look at some of my figures and my sales and stuff, and it's like, it makes a difference that I've been doing it for 10 years, because I just have more games in the back catalog than you do at this point. And like, for the games you've released already, like, they've already outperformed plenty of my games, or, they're doing really good, but it's like maybe you just need some more games, which just equals more time, So it's like if someone's trying to start out to do the small thing, it's really hard to get multiple winners year after year after year. And like, I talked about building my franchises a lot. Like I've got the Tilting Tiles puzzle franchise. I got the Perplexing Orb, arcade franchise. I got a first person puzzle franchise with Maze. You solve your way out of 3D mazes and stuff. I've got tons of different games, and then I make one-off games all the time, like Mighty Math, or like a top-down arcade shooter, Annihilation, or The Letter, the horror game. All sorts of stuff. Like I'm making games all the time. But like really, if you don't have like what it takes to like think years in advance and think like, okay, these are the 4 games I'm making this year. Next year, I'm going to be rolling into these 4 games. I'm going to be rolling into these 4 games. This game is going to build off this game. This one's going to build off this game. We're going to take a break. We're going to do 2 brand new games in 2 years from now. And then after that, this game is going to go back and roll off this game. Unless you can strategically plan out years in advance and really cultivate multiple different IPs that people are going to want to play and enjoy to play, it's a lot of work for not a whole lot of reward. So I don't even know, like, I would say that it's doable. Like, I really think that it is doable. And like, this is a path to, full-time income for people, but it's really, really difficult. And sometimes I think like making the really, really big game, like the one game, is also viable as long as you're willing to self-fund like, as long as you're willing to work a full-time job and, work on the game 3 hours a night for like 5 or 6 years. Because it's not, maybe it might not come out, maybe 2 years, 2 years doing that, you might be able to come out with something larger scale. But then I don't know if that's the best way either, because now game sales, like we were just talking about, sales are way down and the algorithm is fickle, and you could be doing that for years, have the wish list you need, and then come out and make 20 grand and then go, well, I just spent 4 years on this, 3 years on that, even 2 years, and you spread out 10 grand over 2 years and you pay your taxes on it. That is a highly, like, I mean, if you're watching this, like, you might be lucky to make 20 grand. Like, that might be low for some people. You see people share their Steam numbers, and sure, they make $100,000 or $150,000 or whatever, but it's extremely hard to do that. Like, even $20,000 is hard to do that. You're most likely going to be looking for your first game between $1,000 and $5,000, on Steam, something like that. And, so that's dangerous. It's viable but dangerous. What I'm doing is viable but dangerous and very difficult. The publisher thing is viable, but it's like becoming less viable because the money's not flowing as much, so they're not paying out as much. There's less publishers. I don't know if I would go that route. I wouldn't really tell people to do that because, dude, every week publishers are closing the doors. What would you do if you were like working with a publisher, you're expecting them to do all this marketing for you, and then they're like, well, guess what, guys? All the staff just quit. It's over. Or they just shut down. Shut down Humble Publishing. It's like they're shutting down major publishing wings. Yeah. So I don't know, dude.
Yeah.
The indie dream is dead.
I think that I wouldn't say the dream is dead, but I liked your phrase that you used for almost every route, which is what did you say? Viable but
dangerous,
risky?
but viable.
Dangerous but viable. Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and almost all of them are dangerous but viable. Yeah. I think that's great.
And I think a lot of people just like watch these videos. That's why I'm trying to be a little bit really honest in this. Because I feel like a lot of people are like see this stuff or see videos from all these other game dev YouTubers and think, oh, I'll just do this. It's super easy. You could do the same thing. You could do the same thing I'm doing. And make your games, and your games could be good, and then it's still just not work out for any of those reasons, like bad timing, bad algorithm, you didn't have enough press, you didn't build up a big enough following in time, you got bills to pay, and the game made money but just not enough money, so now you just got to call it quits. So strategically planning it all is just highly difficult. You know what I mean?
100%. Okay, now let's shift. I know. On that positive note, let's shift to the future, which is bright, right?
Yeah. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, so looking to the future, I want to know what does the future look like for Eli and TreeFall Studios? What are your long-term goals? Where do you think the industry will be 5 years from now? And how do you think that this changing landscape will affect indie devs?
I think a lot of indie devs, to get this started, I'm assuming this is our last topic question. The indie devs are going to see a lot of pain over the next couple of years. A lot more people are going to close. A lot of people who have tried to start now are going to go under. There's going to be a lot of people who are successful, and you're going to look at them and think, oh, I can do it too. But it's like, it just feels like it's consolidating at the top. You know, it's kind of like how mobile games, like people think, oh, there's a ton of money in mobile, but it's like 10 developers that have like 98% of the entire market share, basically. That's basically happening. And you only have people like me and like people like you that are out here doing it because like I live on a slimmed down budget. It's like I'm solo deving. I'm not paying anybody. You know, I'm living a really minimalist lifestyle, basically, and living off a very low salary. You know, and a lot of people might not be able to be willing to do that based on family size, location, where you live in the country matters. If you even live in the United States, you could be watching this somewhere else and your cost of living be cheaper and you might have a way easier time, or it could be way more expensive and you have a tougher time.
I just had a video where I talked about my Steam revenue from the past year, and it was like 6,000 and some change. And I was like, you know, obviously that's not enough to live off of. And some people commented on that video, and they're like, where I live, that would be like plenty of money for a yearly salary. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome then. But that's not the case for me. Yeah, I
think, and there's a lot of indie developers who have been in the game for a while, actually, and I think that does play a factor, because there's a lot of people in Europe and different smaller countries over there and other places to where it's like, you know, they might be cheaper than us. Some of them might be more expensive. So it all just depends on your situation, really. But yeah, I don't know. For me, going forward, but I think there's going to be a lot of success, and I think you're going to see good games come out of this. And for the people who are fighting, you know, to make good art and to make good games, like there's going to be plenty of good games. I think for the console space, it's like a little wonky because you got trouble. You don't know how Nintendo's next console is going to go. I really don't think it's going to do gangbusters like the Switch did. I think that it will. Like, I think it's going to be highly successful, but I really think they're going to come out with like a $400 or $500 price point, and it's going to be expensive. And like the Switches that were sold to, you know, Switch numbers are highly inflated because a lot of people have multiple Switches. A lot of people bought Switches for kids and stuff like that. And like parents who just bought them for little itty bitty kids are just going to, you know, leave them with the original one instead of paying $500 for a new one, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm just theoretically saying that. We don't really know what their plans are. But if the PS5 Pro is anything to go on, it's $700. You know, even at $400, it's going to look like a steal. But I just think that like everything is getting more expensive. Like game consoles are getting more expensive. You know, building PCs are getting more expensive. That's like for a hardcore audience. So I feel like you're losing some casual players over the next course of the next 5-10 years until things even back out. So you're losing some of that. We talked about the visibility, the storefronts. I didn't even really get into that, but PlayStation has changed a lot to hide the shovelware. And it's harder for regular games like mine, you know, or yours to get seen. So you just have less visibility than you used to have. And you basically have to break into the promotion status in order to, you know, do really, really well. So I think it's going to be very hard. For me personally, I'm going to start shooting, and I'm going to move my average up from 2 games a year. In the short term, I'm going to be averaging like 4 games a year because you know, I've got a range of like how much each of my games make, and I'm working on, you know, that assumption. And I'm like, if I can at least release this many plus, you know, doing discounts on my old games and stuff like that, you know, like this many will be enough for me to pull out a full-time salary for this coming year. But I actually, for the future, I want to change that, and I want to get back, because a lot of my games now, like I really like them, but they are even smaller. They're like the smallest scope projects that I've been doing. They're concise, they're complete. You know, there may be a few hour experiences for people to play and enjoy, but I do have some bigger games that I've released in the past, like the original Tilting Tiles, the original Maze Pedestal of Trials, Perplexing Orb 2, Pitter Pot. Some of those games I spent 6 months to a year making them, some cases multiple years, and they're bigger games, 5-6 hour games, multiplayer, local multiplayer, that kind of thing. They cost like $10, $5 to $10 usually, instead of $3 or $4, which are some of my smaller games cost. And I would like to shift back into 2 games of that caliber a year once the market kind of levels back out some. I think that it will. But for the time being, I'm going to go like up to like 3 to 4, maybe
Nice.
Next year it might be 3, that kind of thing. So I'm just
So
going
that's
to keep rolling
interesting,
along, doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was curious because I've thought this as well. Like, okay, do I try and increase quantity or quality of my games? And I like that you are thinking long term, and you're saying in the short term, quantity of games will help me to for sure succeed in this next year, but after that I want to increase the quality of my games. Not to say that your games aren't good quality, but there is like, you can always increase the scope and the complexity of your games, and so so that's your ultimate trajectory, but you're kind of doing both.
Yeah, so I mean, you summed it up perfect. I'll just make a brief point on that. What I'm trying to do now is like I'm trying to learn a skill of increasing the quality of my really small scope games. So like these small ones are still coming out really quickly, but they're getting better every time. But like you said, I do want to increase to like even higher quality, and that just does take more time for a larger game, and like that's where I want to go. So it's like it's a shifting scale, because like you said, we can't do those longer quality games. We can't make those giant games without doing the short term small games. Yep. You've got to have funding. You got to keep going. So like I'm gonna be on a shifting scale between 2 and 4 games over the next couple of years. And if the economy changes, if all of a sudden, who knows, maybe the PS5 Pro will blow up and tons of people will buy it, or maybe that'll get people to go buy the old one, because they're like, oh, it's not that expensive after all, and a bunch of big games are coming out next year, and a lot of people are going to be buying consoles. You got Grand Theft Auto and all these games where it's like, I don't play those games, but people are going to have to buy a console for it. It's not coming out on PC, and everybody's going to buy that game. So you're going to have an influx of PlayStation users. I'm assuming that it's going to be mostly PlayStation compared to the Xbox. They're the same price. They'll sell more PS5 Pros, than the Xbox version will. So there's going to be a lot of console gamers coming back to the market who maybe have been on PS4 who haven't been playing, indie games, and like maybe they'll be able to see your game. You maybe get more visibility. So, and maybe the economy will get a little bit better. It all just depends on where things end up. I'm not going into that.
Yeah, that's a whole separate podcast.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Eli, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on to this podcast. I'll leave some links in the description so that people can check out your games and your YouTube channel. But is there anything else that you want to plug where people can follow what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Subscribe to Thomas Stewart's channel if you're watching this.
My man.
Yeah, my boy right here. You guys, you can find me at TreeFall Studios on YouTube. So I make YouTube videos. Like I said, it's mostly about my games, but I do have some game development tips videos. So, if you enjoyed this conversation, you found it anything helpful, you'll find more stuff like that on my channel. So you can subscribe if you want to. You don't have to, that's fine. And then I've got a Discord you guys can join. You'll find links to that invite on my YouTube channel. And, we tweet a bunch of stuff on Twitter. So you can find us. It's actually TreeFall Games on Twitter, not TreeFall Studios. But the name of the account is TreeFall Studios. So if you type in either one, you should be able to find it. And all the games I released, I didn't talk about them too much individually, but tons of games are on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, and I got some games on Steam, so if you thought any of that sounded cool, you can check out those games, and that'd be highly appreciated. Dude, yeah, Thomas, awesome. Thanks for having me on. This was a blast. For the viewers who don't know, me and Thomas chat all the time, so, we're just recording this one for fun.
Yep, exactly.
So I had a great time hanging out and chatting with you, as always, dude.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you later, Eli.
All right, see you, bro.
Boom.